I'm not going to waste your time here. You want to create a Super Mario Galaxy super epic orchestral theme. So let's get straight into it, starting with the introduction. Now, there are two ways to start a grand Super Mario Galaxy level theme. Either you can begin super huge, super massive, some sort of very triumphant chords over a strong melodic fragment, or maybe you want to go for something more like Space Junk, where it's more chill and it is more of a pad leading into the main melody. So those are the two main ways to go about it. But of course, the most important part is to have a proper transition to the A section, which we're getting into next. So the A section, this is where we introduce the first main melody of the piece. Usually this A section is pretty chill, but usually around halfway through things get significantly stronger, and generally those original chords change to become more persistent, more tense. In Gusty Garden Galaxy, those chords become more dissonant and even a little bit crunchy at times. And the melody itself is usually in a stricter form, like period form or a sentence form. And usually things end very, very big, very, very climactically. So with, say, the flat 6, flat 7, 1 chord progression, which is the Mario cadence. Very useful to know for making any sort of Mario or like even video game inspired pieces. So some general tips here though is that you generally want to keep a very strong rhythm, generally some like sort of eighth note rhythm. Like, I'm sure this sounds very, very familiar to you. So something like that, you can directly copy that. That is just a rhythm, it's not copyrighted. And this is used in some like sort of form. It's used in Gusty Gardens, using Cloudy Court Galaxy. It's used Sky Station, Good Egg sort of. Like it is used in, oh, the camera angle. It is used in all of the major sort of themes with it. So that helps keep pushing things forward as you develop the melody. Now moving on to the B section, this is where you contrast that original A section. So if your A section ended super huge, super big, then you generally want to bring things down a bit, make it quieter, but you also want it to still be tense, because the whole point of the B section is to either lead back to the A section in a loop, or more preferably go to the C section, which we will talk about soon. So during this B section, don't be afraid to go out of the scale a lot. In fact, don't be afraid to completely change keys. Just make sure that you set up the return to the original key. And this is kind of a cool thing, but a lot of these Super Mario Galaxy level theme B themes have some sort of solo. Like in Gusty Garden, it was a trumpet solo, which I for the longest time thought was a trombone solo. Who knows why, but it is a trumpet solo. And then for Cloudy Court Galaxy, say, it is a flute solo. So perhaps keep that in mind as well, so that you may want to use a soloist here to add to that tension, but also bring down the overall size of it, because we are focusing on a single player instead of like the entire orchestra basically. And then finally, dedicate the last 4 to 8 bars to a transition to the C section, which I'm going to talk about right now. The C section is technically optional, but that's like eating toast without anything on it. It's sacrilegious, you shouldn't do it. So make sure you add a strong C section to your piece. So the melody of the C section is usually a developed, often very heavily developed version of the A section melody. So don't be afraid to take a few basic ideas from the A section melody and then really stretch them, really pull them, and see how much bigger that like you can make it sound, how much more climactic, how much more exciting. And of course, this is the big climactic C section, so don't be afraid to put huge melodic leaps within the melody. And of course, do not be afraid to leave the scale a bit to perhaps grab some of those more exciting chords, like the major second chord, or the flat 6, flat 7 progression, even like the major 6 chord. Sounds great there too. And Cloudy Chord Galaxy has this really amazing descending bass line within its C section, which sounds absolutely amazing. It's like you may have heard that yourself. Maybe I'm just being a huge geek right now, but this is a style of music which I really enjoy, and something that I also enjoy to compose from time to time. In fact, you might be seeing visuals of some sort of piece which like writing right now, which is sort of based off of this sort of idea. But of course, the one thing which I didn't do for that piece, because it was a part of a greater whole, was have it loop back to the A section. Remember, this is still a level theme. This is still a video game theme, and therefore, because it's a level theme, it must loop. So make sure the end of the C section is able to loop back to the A section seamlessly. And of course, this is where that rhythm can be super useful, because it is sort of a rhythm that is used throughout the entire piece in many of these level themes. And if, say, you are going for more of a chill level theme like Gateway Galaxy or Space Junk Galaxy, you could bring back that original pad or that original arpeggio to sort of bring things back. Of course, don't make it painfully obvious, like, oh, here we go, we're going back to the A section. Like, make it be like, oh, we're back home. So here's some harmonic tips to make it sound more Mario, to make it sound more like a Mario Galaxy theme. Of course, do not forget about the flat 6, flat 7, 1 progression, aka the Mario cadence. Super important to just use this. Don't use it constantly, because it will sound obnoxious and quite boring after a few uses. Maybe use it once or twice, and it'll be awesome. Sound great. Don't be afraid of using some chromaticism. This is something that a lot of Mario themes use. It's just using that like chromatic scale to do whatever the hell you want, but usually to go from one melodic note to another, like da 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 da, like that. And of course, as I said earlier, with the B section, do not be afraid to change keys. Pretty sure Gusty I use this example so much, but it's a masterclass of how to write a really great level theme. But Gusty Garden Galaxy starts off in D flat major, and then I believe it transitions to A major, but it almost sounds like D flat minor. There are a lot of things going on here, but then after being in that secondary key, it then transitions flawlessly back to D flat major for the big C section. But of course, what I would do is just sort of make it sound vague, not necessarily atonal, but make it sound pretty vague, how you are basically jumping around everywhere until you eventually wind your way back to the tonic, just like you would do in a sonata form composition. But that's a completely different video of where you start in the home key, you then transition to a different key, you sort of move around everywhere, and then you eventually go back to the tonic, which to the listener, if executed properly, sounds very satisfying, especially as you transition back to the main tonic, which for Gusty Garden Galaxy was D flat major. For you, it could be anything. All right, here's some orchestration tips. If you're going for a smaller, more chill theme, you could still use the entire orchestra, because it is possible for a full orchestra to sound very soft, very subtle, especially when like you take away the heavy brass, the trumpets and the trombones, as well as perhaps tuba as well. As those, even when they play softly, they have this very rough texture to them, which you may not want in a more chill, spacey theme. So then I would recommend pulling out a DAW or something and using some synths. It's not really a score anymore, but still is a composition. So using these synths, like I would say some, not necessarily chip waves, but some cool synths that sound spacey with, of course, a piano. The piano gives it a great effect for the orchestration. But if you're going for a huge theme, huge, climactic, massive theme like Gusty Garden Galaxy, then of course use the full orchestra. Use whatever you need to make it sound the way that you want it to sound. If you're who I think you are, you probably don't have access to a full orchestra anyways. Therefore, you can basically use whatever numbers you want because this is more of a digital composition. Although if for whatever reason you are composing for a game and you have access to some sort of orchestra or some sort of ensemble, then of course make sure you write appropriately to that ensemble. But that's just obvious, you know. So some orchestrating tips. I would say if you want to completely replicate the style of, say, something like Gusty Garden Galaxy, a good doubling would be violins and oboe. Sounds amazing, but that sounds a little too close to the original Gusty Garden Galaxy main melody, or the A section one. But there's also, I find that those composers, like, I'll probably butcher their name, so I won't say it, but those composers like to use violins and trumpets. But the trumpets completely absorb the like violins, but in general it can still sound super great as it is the trumpets, but they are being heavily supported by the violins, which makes them sound strong and flowing almost. But you could also double them with flutes, and for that very persistent rhythm, the snare drum usually plays a more complex version of it. So something like that, and it sounds great. And of course, use as much percussion as you can use to make it sound the way that you want to sound like. But basically, if you're orchestrating it to be massive, start with a basic orchestra and then go from there. See what you can do. My voice. But don't forget one of the most important things about orchestrating things well, and that is doubling. As I said earlier, oboe, violins, flute, violins, brass, violins. Strings are really good for doubling everything. Tuba, double basses, horns, cellos, like violas with anything, honestly. And yeah, the reason why I made this video is this is something that when I was a younger composer, this is something that I was trying to do very persistently. I was always trying to copy the style. Now I've more or less succeeded at that, and I can teach other people the way to do it, about how to use a specific pattern, the specific ABC structure, as well as this overall theme and mood to create something wonderful and in the style of Super Mario Galaxy. So, I wonder what I'm going to say next. Keep making better music.